So the Las Vegas Raiders began OTAs just a couple days back, and yesterday was the very first day that the Raiders media was actually allowed inside the building. And there's some interesting reports that are now coming out. The guy that I speak to at the Las Vegas Raiders practices told me some interesting things regarding which guys are kind of playing where. And one of the guys that's kind of stood out is rookie cornerback Darien Porter. And I want to talk about him and just kind of start right there, right? So one of the things this guy told me was that first and foremost, Darien Porter is taking a lot of snaps with the first team unit. The Raiders have kind of thrown this guy in there, and he's looked good. In fact, before practice, I actually reached out to this guy and said to look specifically for Darien Porter. See which unit he's coming in with. See, where guys like Eric Stokes and Ja'Cory Bennett and some of the other cornerbacks we have. Keep an eye on where some of these guys are kind of lining up. And from what I'm hearing, Darien Porter has looked really, really good, and he's looked good with the first team unit. And to me, this is massive, right? Because if you think about it, and I know it's very, very early on in the process, right? So I totally understand that. But if you guys think about it in this other instance, right? The Las Vegas Raiders right now have, their first team offense out there. Colt Miller's playing left tackle. Dylan Parham's at left guard. Paris Johnson's at center. Right guard is going to be Alex Cappa. Right tackle is going to be DJ Glaze. That's telling you that this is who we think is going to be the first team offensive unit, right? When the Raiders come out with their first team defense, it's going to be the guys that they kind of expect to start. Now, obviously, things can always change, right? Maybe it's a different guy or another guy on top of that. But the fact that Darien Porter is going out there right now with the first team unit is a really, really, really good sign. I've also heard that Eric Stokes has looked really good out there. Ja'Cory Bennett is going to most likely also start for the Raiders. I don't expect Stokes or Darien Porter to start in front of Ja'Cory Bennett, but we know what Ja'Cory Bennett is, so I would expect him to be one of the starters as well. And then at safety, of course, you have the two guys who I'm kind of surprised are going to be the Raiders safeties, starting safeties. Jeremy Chin is going to be the guy kind of playing in the box, rotating down. And then Isaiah Pola-Mao, at least right now, looks to be the Raiders starting free safety. Now, I think that could change. The guy didn't say that, like, hey, I noticed anyone specifically rotating in or anything like that. I did ask him to pay attention to that specifically for the next practice. It's going to be open to the media. But Darien Porter is the guy that I had specifically asked about, and apparently this guy's looked really, really good. He said he didn't notice Porter giving up any sort of catches, at least any deep catches or any touchdowns. He didn't necessarily make any plays out there, right? Like he didn't have an interception, which would have been very, very noticeable. But the guy was solid, right, from what he saw. And he said that specifically when he was playing off coverage, that's when he did a really good job breaking on the football that he had noticed. To me, that's something that you want to hear, right? That's something that is positive. Now, what this guy sees, of course, is subjective, right? Porter, for all we know, was really, really bad out there. But at least according to this one guy, Darien Porter could potentially be a good football player for the Raiders. And I want you guys to also think back, 2 camps ago, essentially, Ja'Cory Bennett, his very first time with the Las Vegas Raiders, rookie year, this guy was thrown in there to start for the Raiders. Patrick Graham had this guy lining up as a starting right cornerback. And obviously the game was just a little bit too fast for him, and he ended up not starting for the Raiders. But we knew that there was a potential that he could start, and in camp, for the most part, he was the starting corner for the Raiders. Obviously, the Raiders ended up swapping him out, right? Amik Robertson ended up playing a lot. I think they had a couple other guys that kind of rotated in. But eventually, Ja'Cory Bennett got his chance, and Bennett looked really, really, really good. And it kind of explained why Ja'Cory Bennett, early on in the process, was a starting corner for the Raiders. Obviously, there was upside and there was potential. And this year, Bennett could potentially break out, right? But I love the fact that Darien Porter's been kind of thrown in there. And we're going to find out a lot about this guy. It's interesting because Cameron Richardson just last year was also drafted fairly high, right? He was a 4th round pick. You'd expect him to develop this year as well. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think Darien Porter being kind of handpicked by a guy like Pete Carroll, we are going to switch to a much heavier zone scheme. To me, it's going to make sense that Porter's going to kind of have that upper hand on Richardson, right? Unless Richardson really developed, kind of coming into year 2, which he could. There's a real chance that Darien Porter's going to end up starting for the Raiders this season. Another thing to kind of keep in mind with Porter is in college at Iowa State, he didn't play a whole lot. The guy only played, I think, like 700-ish snaps in his entire career. There's some guys this year that came out that just in this final year, they played more than 700 snaps. So Porter hasn't played a whole lot. So there's kind of that unknown factor a little bit with this guy. But we do know that, he has 4.3 speed. We do know he has, a 6.3.5 frame. We know in zone coverage specifically, he was Pro Football Focus's highest rated corner, or one of the highest rated corners. And his tape definitely does back that up in zone coverage specifically. So it will be interesting to see what the Raiders kind of do as the offseason kind of continues to progress. And I understand, super early on in the process, but these are the things you want to be able to see early on in the process as well, right? The worst thing that could happen right now is that, hey, Darien Porter's rotating in with the third unit, right? That would be a bad sign. So I'm excited to continue to see this guy kind of develop a little bit. I do want to also switch focus. There's a couple more things that I kind of want to get into. I want to start right here with this video posted by Vegas Sports today. They honestly post some of the best content. If you guys don't already follow them, go check them out on Twitter. And I think they have a YouTube channel as well, so go check out their YouTube channel. But this video here specifically, Raiders offensive lineman Dalton Wagner and guard Caleb Rogers executed a zone block, and it was Charles Grant that got knocked down to the floor. So I'm going to let you guys check this play out, and then I also want to kind of talk about it as well. So we'll talk about what this play actually is. So it does look like it is some sort of wide zone concept, and you can tell based off of how much depth these guys are getting to the right. Now, keep in mind, these guys are essentially playing the left side of the offensive line, which we'll talk about Caleb Rogers playing left guard, because that's kind of a new development that I really didn't see coming. But yeah, so they're on the back side of a zone run. The zone run's going to be over here to the right. It's outside zone, as Mike Dixon is saying, based off the depth that these guys are getting. Now, I don't know if the coaches actually said that, but it definitely looks like outside zone to me. And they're essentially passing off the 3 technique to the left tackle, right? So Caleb Rogers gets out of his stance here. He's going to put the left hand into this guy, and then Dalton Wagner has to overtake this guy as well, right? And Wagner does a good job with that arm, kind of getting in front of this guy, cutting him off, and he ends up knocking him down to the ground as well. That's actually a really, really nice block by Wagner. It is bags, right? But regardless, right, kind of just being physical. And then with that, Rogers also has to climb up to the linebacker. Now, if the linebacker here ends up hitting the backside gap, Rogers would probably stick to the D tackle here, and then one of them will eventually get over here to the linebacker, but because the linebacker was over the top, Rogers has to get to this guy. So that's a pretty nice job by those two guys. The main reason why you're blocking this the way you're blocking it is because you want those cutback lanes to develop. When you get these linebackers, these D linemen, when you get these guys running 4, 5, 6, 7 yards to the right, the way he is here, the reason why you want to do that is, or the benefit of that is because if you can get in front of one guy, keep in mind there's going to be like 8 defenders that you're going to be doing the same exact concept to. If one guy gets out of their gap, Ashton Genty's taking that play to the house, right? So like this instance here, the guy does end up falling down. That's going to create that cutback lane, right? That's a pretty good job right there by those two guys. But I also do want to just kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the fact that Caleb Rogers is lined up at left guard. And, generally speaking, when you're like a 3rd or 4th year player, it might not matter as much if you're lined up as a left guard, if you're lined up as a right guard. But when you're a rookie, it's a little bit different, right? And another thing that my guy had told me yesterday was that one of the things he had noticed with the offensive line was that it doesn't seem like Dylan Parham has that left guard job locked in, right? He doesn't think that Dylan Parham is ahead of Alex Kappa right now. He actually thinks that Alex Kappa is most likely locked in to start at right guard, versus Dylan Parham is not guaranteed. He thinks Dylan Parham might not even end up starting for the Raiders. He even put it out there saying that Caleb Rogers came in with the first team unit, as did Jordan Meredith, right? Both guys kind of came in. He did say that Jordan Meredith had more snaps with the first team unit, but he said towards the end of practice, at one point, Caleb Rogers did have a couple of snaps at the left guard position when they're in their 11-on-11s. So with that, I want you guys to kind of think about this, or just kind of taking a step back. We have Caleb Rogers, and then we have Charles Grant. The Raiders could have drafted Charles Grant with the 98th pick, right? 1 pick before they drafted Caleb Rogers, right? They could have taken Charles Grant with the pick before. But they took Caleb Rogers first, and they took Charles Grant second. And that's done, by design, But that's essentially, letting those two guys know as well that we value one guy a little bit more than the other, right? And I know some people are going to fight against this, but I want you guys to think about this. It's not guaranteed that Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant start this season. But if one guy does end up starting, if one guy ends up playing out of those two guys, is going to be the guy that was drafted first. Now, of course, if Charles Grant's just a lot better, he'll end up playing over Caleb Rogers. But I think the Raiders' thought process behind this is hey, our left guard position is the position we feel, it's kind of up in the air, right? We're not 100% sold with Dylan Parham. We're not 100% sold with Jordan Meredith. And what we want to do is we want to bring in a guy who we think could be a long-term starter in Caleb Rogers, which they've already announced him as a guard. We think this guy is a long-term starter for the Raiders at the guard position. We also think Alex Kappa is capable for this year and potentially next year as well, which is why we gave him a 2-year contract. Keep in mind, John Spytek has been with Alex Kappa in the past, right? Kappa was with the Buccaneers. So Spytek has handpicked Alex Kappa, right? So essentially what's happening is the Raiders feel that, hey, we're going to allow the rookie that we drafted to compete at that left guard position, and we'll open that one battle up. We'll let these three guys kind of fight it out. Understanding that Caleb Rogers was a right tackle in college, he has to learn that left guard stance now, but more than that, as he kind of gets comfortable, if he looks good enough, he's going to take that job over. And there's pretty much a 0% chance the Raiders are going to bring Dylan Parham back after the season. I wouldn't even be surprised if he gets released before the actual first game of the season, right? Like after the training camp cuts kind of happen. I wouldn't be surprised if Dylan Parham ends up getting cut, assuming Caleb Rogers looks good, Jordan Meredith, Alex Kappa, and then maybe one of the other guys, right? We have Will Putnam as well from last year. We have a couple other guard options as well. And there's another guy that could potentially play guard, which we're going to talk about here in a second. I think there's a real chance, though, that the Raiders look at Caleb Rogers and feel that, hey, we think this guy over the next, 6 to 12 months at some point, maybe it's in camp, maybe it's early on in the season, maybe it's later on in the season. At some point, we feel Caleb Rogers can take over at left guard, which is exactly why they have had him transition over to that position. At least in my opinion, that's why they have him going from right tackle to left guard. I think the Raiders obviously feel more comfortable with Alex Kappa. Caleb Rogers would also be the guy that's going to get the nod over Charles Grant. And this also explains what the Raiders are kind of doing with Charles Grant. If Charles Grant does not start at right tackle this next season, right, the upcoming season, which could very well happen, he will at least compete at right tackle, right? He will have his right hand into the ground. He'll be playing that position essentially. And there's also a chance that he ends up playing right guard if he can't start at right tackle, right? If Charles Grant's better than Alex Kappa, which I think he is, I think there's a real chance this guy could end up starting at right guard. But me saying all that also kind of means that, Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant, they won't be playing the same side, right? Because the worst case scenario with Charles Grant is he'll play right guard for a year or two to develop, to potentially get back out there to right tackle. Either way, man, I hope you guys kind of followed me along with that talk. I do want to talk about one final thing here. There's a guy that the Raiders brought in this season. If you guys don't know who I'm talking about, I'm talking about Big 79 here. Absolute monster. This guy is 6'6.5". He's 350 pounds. And then more than that, he's raw, but he has tremendous upside. We're talking about Laki Tasi coming out of Australia, right? Samoan descent coming out of Australia. This guy right here was actually signed to the Raiders, and he was actually listed as a defensive tackle, right? Initially, everybody was like, hey, he's a defensive tackle, and that's actually not happening. The Raiders are actually developing this guy, believe it or not, to play on the right side of the offensive line based off of some of the videos that are coming out. But from what I'm hearing, this guy's being developed to play guard, right? And I'm not sure if that's going to stick, right? He could potentially jump out to the outside if you want to continue to kind of develop him. Jordan Mailata, great example of a guy, really, really raw, came in the International Pathway Program, years back, developed for 3-4 years behind Jason Peters, and now Jordan Mailata is a top 5 to 7 left tackle in the NFL. He's one of the very, very best left tackles. And again, it was kind of that development. And Laki Tasi is most likely going to end up playing on the offensive side for the Las Vegas Raiders. And maybe that changes. Maybe he goes back to the defensive side, right? He's a guy that is kind of positionless because he doesn't have a whole lot of experience with football. But he's a guy that has been playing on the offensive line, specifically interior offensive line, the right guard position specifically. To me, this is an interesting development, right? Because I did not think this guy would actually end up playing offensive line. Now, again, this could change, but I would find it hard to believe that this is going to end up changing. I think the Raiders have seen this guy's highlights, which go check him out if you guys have not watched him. I keep telling you guys that. But most likely the Raiders saw this guy's highlights somewhere and said, you know, the movement that this guy has, that quickness, for being 348 pounds, you don't generally get that in guys. And with that, what we want to actually end up doing with this guy is we want to actually change his position to offensive line, because as offensive lineman, the number one trait that you need as an offensive lineman is movement, right? Movement is easily the most important trait among offensive linemen, especially offensive tackles, right? You look at Jackson Powers-Johnson, what separates him from Dylan Parham, for example, is, you know, Dylan Parham's probably a bad example. Both guys are really, really fast, right? But Jackson Powers-Johnson's bigger and stronger than Dylan Parham, for example, right? But Jackson Powers-Johnson, for his size, absolute insane movement, right? Movement, to me, is the most important factor for offensive linemen. It's why when the Raiders brought in Colt Miller, you know, you saw the movement, you saw the quickness. You knew that there was upside with this guy right away, right? Because you don't generally move that fast at that size, right? But Laki Tasi is being developed on the offensive line. I think this is really, really interesting, and we'll see what he can kind of develop into, right? Nothing's ever guaranteed. He may even just bust out in a year or two, but regardless, I like the story, and I'm excited to see what he can actually develop into. There's a couple other images I want to just show you guys. You got another one here. So you got 72 here. You got number 60, Charles Grant, Jackson Powers-Johnson. You got a couple other guys here as well. Charles Grant definitely looks the size, man. Jackson Powers-Johnson is not a small guy, right? This guy's massive. If you guys saw that video with Powers-Johnson and Ashton Jeanty, you know how much bigger Powers-Johnson is than Ashton Jeanty. Jeanty might be a bad example, but Charles Grant is just as big, if not bigger, than Powers-Johnson. Now, he may not be as thick as Powers-Johnson, but like, look at the arms, the height, and Charles Grant, you know, 6'5.5", 35-inch arms. The guy is built to be an offensive tackle. A couple more images. 84, you got the tight end. 89, Brock Bowers. Probably a tight ends coach. I don't even know who that is, to be honest. You got that same image here with Tasi. You got Ashton Jeanty here. Pretty cool, man. I'm excited, though, man. There's just so much information that's going to be coming out. Just kind of go forward. We do got to obviously realize it is OTAs, but it starts in OTAs, man. It starts in April. So let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.